Now we are going to start with the next season, that is the rainy season. And I feel that it's much better if I explain to you with the help of a diagram, the approach of the monsoons. Okay? Now, see, these are the northeast trade winds. Okay? Now, this particular fact, which is this particular term over here, okay, which is the Coriolis force, okay, winds that blow from the southern hemisphere, instead of going straight, it gets deflected to the right hand side. Okay, the winds get deflected to the, like in this particular manner. Okay, the winds, instead of going straight, get deflected towards the right hand side. Gets deflected toward the right hand side. And winds blowing from the southern hemisphere, from the northern hemisphere, instead of going straight, it gets deflected towards the left hand side. Okay, so this movement is caused by the Coriolis force. So this force that affects the movement of the winds takes place only along the equatorial region. Okay, this is the place, the equatorial region, where the winds, as they cross the equator, they get deflected towards the right-hand side. And again, as I explained, the winds from the northern hemisphere, as they cross the equator, instead of going straight, with the broken lines, I've done, excuse me, with the broken lines over here, it gets deflected towards the left-hand side. Now, as I've already explained, because of the very high temperature, because of the very high temperature, I'll write LP over here. LP means low pressure. That explains earlier one that I've already explained, where high temperature leads to low pressure. Okay, so because of the intense heat from March to May, this is the approaching of the monsoons. From March to May, when the temperature intensifies, the low pressure is so strong that it attracts the winds from the water bodies over to the land. All right. Now there are two factors, two relief features. Remember this, mark it down. The two relief features that play a very important role in the, what is this? In the uneven distribution of rainfall because of the relief features. This is one of the characteristic. Okay, so here I'll explain, is the Western Ghats, and number 2 is the Himalayas. That is right up here. Okay, now if you look at this diagram carefully, okay, I have done this, okay, to explain that this is a highland region, and if you look at the plateau, the Deccan Plateau, it is sloping towards the Bay of Bengal. So if you notice, all the rivers, the peninsular rivers, drain into the Bay of Bengal. All the peninsular rivers drain into the Bay of Bengal. There are only two west-flowing rivers in peninsular India, that is Narmada and Tapi. These are the only two west-flowing rivers. Otherwise, all these rivers drain into the Bay of Bengal. Now, rivers flow from highland to lowland. So if you look at the slope of the land, you can now easily, you can understand as to why the rivers drain into the Bay of Bengal. Now, if you look at this width over here, western coast and eastern coast, it's different. Okay, western coast is narrow because there are no rivers, nothing or the other, in order to form deltas. Okay, whereas over here along the eastern coast, you find the rivers flowing and it eats up the edges, forming the deltas and making the plains even more broader. Okay, now this is your north, this is your south, this is east, and this is your west. Now when you jumble up these words, a very important word comes up. Some of you may be knowing about it, but anyway, I'm here again to jumble up the word together and give you this word, that is news, which means information that you gather from the four corners of the world. That is, N stands for north, east, west, and south. Okay. Now, what happens is the low pressure is not over the coastal area because coastal areas are not affected much. The low pressure is actually intense more over the northern plains. So these winds, as they cross the equator, because of the Coriolis force, the Coriolis force is the force that makes the wind get deflected to the right hand side as they cross, but the key word again here is cross the equator. Okay, crossing or only after crossing the equator. Okay, now the movement of the winds that is explained, okay, is the Ferrel's law. The Ferrel's law states the movement of the winds blowing from the southern hemisphere and from the northern hemisphere with its deflection in the two directions. Now, the law states that, but actually the movement or the force that actually makes the winds get deflected is the Coriolis force, and the Coriolis force takes place because of the rotation of the earth. Due to the rotation of the earth. Now, quickly we move on to this. The winds, as they cross the equator, as I've already told you, they approach the Indian subcontinent in this particular manner. Okay. So, why I've mentioned Kerala is because it's a question. Normally, sometimes it's asked in the ICC, that is, Kerala is the first state to receive and the last state to see the retreating monsoon. Give reasons for it. Okay. So, because of its location, if you see, Kerala is the first place, and along the western coast, what happens over here is, for any rain-bearing winds, you need a solid barrier to obstruct the wind so that it can cause rainfall. If it's parallel, it can never cause rainfall. Okay. So, as it hits here, okay, the Western Ghats being higher, heavy rainfalls on this side. So, as I said, the Western Ghats play a very significant role in the uneven distribution of rainfall. Okay. So, winds over here, and there are few places that get the Deccan region. Okay. Like there's a question every year in this particular chapter as to Mahabaleshwar receives more rainfall, or why Mumbai receives more rain than Pune. Okay. Because Mumbai is on the windward side, the side that faces the force of the wind. Okay, that faces it, and Pune, which is just a few kilometers away, happens to be in the leeward side. Leeward side means the rain shadow, the opposite side of the hill or a structure where the rainfall becomes less. Okay, so little by little the wind gets deposited, the rainfall gets deposited. Okay, by the time the winds reach here, the winds are almost dry. Okay, now this peninsula structure actually is responsible, okay, for the monsoons to divide into two branches. One is the Bay of Bengal branch, and the other one is the Arabian Sea branch. Okay, this one, as such, from the Bay of Bengal, you have the Andaman and Nicobar Islands here. Okay, they are the first to get it, and the winds, they move up in this particular manner. Okay. All right. Till here. Now, as it comes here, the winds again divides into two branches. One moves up the northeast, and the Himalayas are responsible. Again, the other feature over here, which is responsible for causing heavy rain. So the entire part of the northern plains and the northern zone, the northern region, gets rainfall, either heavy or moderate, but at least it will be able to get rainfall because it acts as a shield, a barrier, okay, for the winds to hit against and cause rainfall. Okay, so as it moves up along the eastern side, okay, there are a lot of hills over here, the Garo hills, the Khasi, Jaintia, the Naga hills and all. So as it moves up, it moves up the Brahmaputra valley, and Cherrapunji happens to be the first place to get the full force without any moisture that is shed. Straight away, this place over here, somewhere here, Cherrapunji, gets the full force of the monsoon. So this is the place that records the highest rainfall in the world, or it's also known as the wettest place on the earth. Okay. Now, this low pressure, as I said, that is between the Thar Desert and the Chota Nagpur Plateau. So this is the zone of intense low pressure. So it brings relief from the 3 months of heat, intense heat. It brings relief from the 3 months of heat. Little by little, the moisture gets deposited. Now, why Thar is a desert? Okay, because it does not get rainfall from the Bay of Bengal branch, neither from the Arabian Sea branch. Okay, so from the Bay of Bengal branch, by the time the winds have deposited all its moisture, it's come here. Okay, remember this, children, that is, the Aravalli hills are low in height with a rounded structure. And they are the only old fold mountain. Mark my word, only old fold mountains. Okay, and the little bit of moisture is deposited on the side that it faces, and the winds cross over, reach the Thar as dry winds. Now, the Arabian Sea branch, if you look at it, okay, the Arabian Sea branch, if you look at this part, the Aravalli Hills and the Arabian Sea branch of the southwest monsoon, they run parallel to each other. So this is exactly what I told you. For any rain-bearing winds, you need a solid barrier, like we had in case of the southwest monsoon winds over here. Okay, it hit against, and the Western Ghat acted as a barrier. Up here as it came, the Himalayas acted as a barrier. But over here, the Aravallis and the southwest monsoon of the Arabian Sea branch, not the Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea branch, they run parallel. And as I've already told you, that the Aravalli Hills are low in height. They are the only old fold mountains in India. So they are not able to trap the winds. Doesn't act as a barrier because it's running parallel, right? And in the desert, one of the characteristics is that the rate of evaporation is more than precipitation. So the winds cross over and it reaches as dry wind. So Thar desert does not get rain, much of the rain. Okay, it does get rain, but very less amount. So the Thar desert does not get rain from the Bay of Bengal branch, neither from the Arabian Sea branch. So this remains as a desert. Okay, so if you know the mechanism of the monsoons, if you're aware of this, especially you have to understand, you have to know the relief features that play a very significant role in the distribution. But what distribution? I've already explained, that is the uneven distribution, one of the key factor. And another characteristic is also explained very well with the diagram because it is largely controlled by orography. Okay, so orography over here means the relief features, the structures that you see, the high ghats over here, then we have the plateau here, again we have the mountains here. So these are the relief features. So this particular, if you understand the mechanism of the monsoons with the diagram, and as you know, geography cannot be done without any maps and diagrams. It's a must. It's an important tool, right? So if you understand this, and if you know about the movement of the winds and its deposition, because from this entire diagram you can understand that it is controlled by orography, relief features, two of these. Another thing is that the distribution of rainfall is also uneven. Okay, so please, dear students, please do a recap. Okay, if you have not jotted down, please, I would request you all to write it down in your textbooks or in your copies, this particular fact about the temperature and the pressure, which is related to each other, that particular fact. Okay, so the remaining part of it, I'll be explaining it to you in the next session, in the next class. So I hope you all have understood what I've done so far. I've tried my best to make you understand. Okay, so till then, stay safe, stay at home, and God bless all.
So now we start with factors affecting demand. Determinants of demand or factors affecting demand. So you might have a question, write two determinants of demand. It means what are the factors? Write two factors affecting demand. The first thing you will think of is what affects demand. You'll simply say price. But there are many others. Price is just one factor. Before I start this, I want to give you some concept about direct inversely related and directly related, and how you draw graphs without learning by heart. Okay, let's have a look. First thing we'll start with is directly related. It's very simple. Let's say if the price of certain goods rise up, going up, and you find quantity also rising. That means as the price increases, quantity demand is also rising. Both are increasing. These are the two variables, price and quantity. They are two variables. When one variable increases, the other variable also increases. This is called direct relation. Inverse related to directly related, that comes again and again to you. So this is called directly related. When both increases, when the price increases, quantity demand also increases, there is a direct relation. Whenever you want to draw a graph, let's take this case, 10, 20, 30 price, and 1 kg, 2 kg, 3 kg in kg, in rupees, quantity demanded. You have your y-axis, you have your x-axis. Don't forget your x-axis, origin, y-axis. Okay, here you will see when the price is going up, quantity demanded is also going up. Say, when the price is 10 rupees, you buy 1 kg. When the price is 20 rupees, you buy 2 kgs. When the price is 30 rupees, you buy 3 kgs. Now this graph, you can see, is a positive sloping graph. Positive sloping. So whenever I tell you that there is a direct relation, when one increases, the other also increases, direct relationship, and it is positive sloping. Positive sloping. The second one is inverse. Let's take the variables price and quantity. When the price increases, quantity demanded falls. When one increases, the other decreases. When price is going up, quantity demand is decreasing, or when the price falls, quantity demanded goes up. Opposite direction, inverse relationship. So when one variable goes up, the other variable goes down. There is a inverse relationship. Let's have a look at the graph. Price in rupees and quantity demanded in kgs per week, of course. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, 30. Okay, let's have a look. Let us say when the price is 30 rupees, you buy 1 kg. When the price is 20 rupees, you buy 2 kg. And when the price is 10 rupees, you buy 3 kgs. You can see the graph. So when you see a graph which is like this, downward sloping towards the right, this is upward sloping towards the right. Towards the right, upward sloping. Towards the right, downward sloping. This downward sloping towards the right is negative. This is positively sloped. This is negatively sloped. So the next time I tell you to draw a positively sloped curve, you have positive and this is negative. This is a concept, all these details do not come in ICSE, it's for higher class 11 and 12. But what you got to know is direct relationship, when one increases, the other increases. Inverse, when one increases, the other decreases. Okay. So now you've understood that, we'll start with price of commodity. The basic thing. What do you know? Very simple. Generally we know when the price of goods increases, then quantity demanded will decrease. Notice this, I have told quantity demanded. I did not say there's increase in demand. There's a big difference between quantity demanded and quantity demanded increases or increase in demand. The word difference is quantity demanded and demand. In price, you will use quantity demanded, and for other factors like income, consumer credit facility, consumers' taste and preference, you have to use just demand. Let's have a look again. Price. The demand for a commodity has an inverse relationship. Inverse relationship. When one increases, the other decreases. So automatically when you see inverse relationship, you'll think of a graph which is negative sloping, downwards towards the right. Negative, inverse, positive, direct. Okay. The demand for a commodity has an inverse relationship to its price. With increase in the price of commodity, its quantity demanded falls, and vice versa means when the price decreases, quantity demanded increases. I have written here law of demand because this is part of the law of demand. In law of demand also, you will learn that when the price increases, quantity demanded falls and vice versa. I will come back later on to explain to you why there is a difference between increase in quantity demanded and increase in demand. Because students confuse. They simply write, sometimes they write increase in quantity demanded, sometimes they write increase in demand. What I can tell you now is, whenever you are talking about a particular price, then you'll use quantity demanded. Whenever there are other factors like income of a consumer, other factors, consumer credit facility, there are many factors which I'll teach later on. There you'll write increase in demand, decrease in demand, not increase in quantity demanded or decrease in quantity. Only in the price you'll write increase in demand, increase in quantity demanded and decrease in. So price you'll have to write increase in quantity demanded or decrease in quantity demanded. And other factors you'll write increase in demand, decrease in demand. I'll get to that later on when you learn the concept. Okay. The next thing is obviously income of the consumer. What do you think when income of the consumer? You will think, okay, when my income increases, definitely I'll buy more. So general thing is I have more purchasing power. Purchasing power means I have more money to buy more better things. Generally we look at this, for example here, you'll see income of the consumer determines the purchasing power consumer. The relationship between the income of a consumer and the demand for a commodity depends upon three types of commodity. So generally what we think is when our income increases, then our demand will also increase. But that is only for normal goods. Normal goods, what is normal goods? Cars, TV, house, sofa, all that comfort, all the luxuries, they are all normal goods. And what happens? Obviously in normal goods what happens is when your income increases, demand, there is a increase in demand of the goods. So normal goods, the demand for normal good increases with increase in income of the consumer. Includes comfort and luxury means anything, TV, house, car, anything that you buy, when your income is more, you tend to buy more of these goods. However, there are goods which we call inferior good. Inferior good, low priced, low quality products. You might have low quality Chinese pen drives, Chinese mobile phones, you get it within 2,000 rupees kind of thing. So they are inferior goods. Or here, a typical bookish example is your maize. We actually, okay, let's say inferior goods. These are goods which are poor in quality, low quality and low priced. And the demand increases with decrease in income and vice versa. Look, when your income decreases, what happens generally? You tend to buy less. And when your income increases, you demand more, not for inferior goods. In inferior goods, what happens is, if your income increases, demand for inferior good decreases. Why is that? It's like this. For example, let us say you are having a very inferior quality rice at home, right? That is around about 10, let's say 20 rupees per kg. Fine. That was when you had a certain income. Now what happens is, here, the price of this rice, this low quality rice, which was 20 rupees, now it is just 10 rupees. It's cheaper. If it's cheaper, you will feel, I'll buy more. No, you don't buy more. What happens is, when that 20 rupees becomes 10 rupees, you will have some extra money. For example, a typical case would be, let's say, so we'll take an example of this inferior goods. Let's say you buy low quality rice, and the price of the rice is 20 rupees per kg. And your household needs 5 kg. How much did you spend? Rupees 100. Now, what has happened now is the price of this low quality rice is going to fall. Now, the price is going to decrease, is going to be just 10 rupees. So what do you think? When the price falls from 20 rupees per kg to 10 rupees per kg, you generally tend to buy more. I've got to spend 100 rupees. I'll buy 10 kgs. 10 tens are 100. I'll spend 100 rupees. I need to buy 10 kgs. No. When the price falls, inferior goods, low quality rice or low quality goods, what happens is you tend to buy less when the price falls. So, if you buy 5 kg, it is same. So you might buy just 2 kgs. You'll notice that when the price falls, there is a decrease in demand. Decrease in demand. So you spend 20 rupees. But generally you need 5 kgs. Here you are buying 2 kgs. So where are you going to get the 3 kgs? So what happens is, let's say you switch over. You now go for, say, superior quality. Now you're going to buy superior quality rice. You used to buy 5 kgs, but you've bought only 2 kgs. You need 3 more kgs. So let's take, for example, you spend on superior quality rice, which is, say, 40 rupees per kg. There's another rice which is 40 rupees per kg, and say you might buy, say, of course you have to spend more here. If it is 30, it will be 60. So, okay. So you buy, let's say if you buy 2 kgs of this, 80 rupees. You spend 20, 80, 100 rupees. You bought 2 kgs of low quality rice and you bought 2 kgs of superior quality rice. What happens is you might think that, okay, this should be 5 kg, not necessary. Okay, there is some calculation, we can adjust that values. But what we need here is, if the price of this low quality inferior good falls, then demand, what happens? There should be increase in demand, but there is a decrease in demand. So this is what happens in inferior goods. In inferior goods, low quality goods, what happens is when the price of the good falls, there will be fall in the demand. The next one is inexpensive good of necessities. I think the example is not given to you here. Inexpensive good of necessities like salt. Salt is inexpensive but a necessity good. So what happens is, if you are buying salt, what happens? Say, for example, a daily wage labor, he buys, say, 200 grams of salt every week. Fine. If you have a better income, if you're well off, then you might buy 2 packets of salt. You're buying more. That means if your income is more, you are buying more. But what happens is, you are very rich, you're very wealthy. You can afford any number of packets of salt. But will you buy 1 truck of salt? No, you're not going to buy. Your limit is just 2 packets of salt or maybe 3 packets of salt. So what happens here is, as your income increases, you tend to buy more up to a certain limit. Say from 200 grams of salt, you're going to buy 2 packets of salt, right? And when your income still increases, you're not going to go for 1 truck of salt, you're going to buy just 2 or 3 packets of salt. That means to say, what happens is, up to a certain limit, as your income increases, demand for these inexpensive good of necessities will increase, but later on, as your income increases, after a certain limit, it will remain constant. Graphs are not done here. This would be enough for ICSE level. The next, consumers' taste and preferences. The demand for a particular commodity depends upon the social customs, habits, fashions, the demand for which increases when favorable. When favorable means, for example, there's a trend in the demand, people like to have that, so the demand will increase. Unfavorable means that people are not going to buy it. The demand won't be there. A typical example is physical fitness craze led to increase in treadmills. You see today the trend, everyone wants to go to gym, buy dumbbells, join a club, gym club. So what happens is the physical fitness craze has become a fashion, a trend. So now today treadmills and all sell. There are a lot of other things like, for example, anything that is out of fashion do not sell. There is no demand. But things which are the in thing that has come today, it's modern, then what happens? The demand for these things increases. Yes, price of related goods. Let's understand price of the related goods. Related goods means how a good is related to the other. When goods are related, it can either be substitute goods or complementary goods, or else it is not related. So let's have a look at substitute goods. What are substitute goods? Substitute goods are goods which satisfy the same type of want and hence can be used in place of one another. You'll have to learn the definition. The demand for a commodity increases when the price of its substitute increases. Price of its substitute. You'll remember the demand for a commodity increases when the price of the substitute has to increase. Not the use for, I will give you an example here. Anyway, remember price of its substitute should increase. If the price of tea increases, if the price of tea, drinking tea, it increases, the demand for coffee will increase. Many consumers will shift the consumption to coffee because coffee has been relatively cheaper. Let me explain this. Okay. Price of related goods, substitute goods. When you take an example of substitute goods, there is tea and coffee, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, many. But we'll stick to tea and coffee. Let us say you drink tea. Your commodity is tea and the substitute is coffee. So if the price of tea is 10 rupees and the price of coffee is, let's say coffee's price is 40 rupees, right? Your commodity is tea, the substitute is coffee, right? So generally you're going to have tea because coffee is expensive. Now we can imagine the price of coffee is now 20 rupees. The price of coffee has decreased. Price has decreased, whereas the price of tea is same. There is no change in the price of tea, your commodity, but the substitute price has decreased to 20 rupees. What has happened here? Here you will see that though the price of tea is same and the price of coffee has decreased, what happens here is people find that tea is relatively costlier. The word is relatively costlier. Though the price is same compared to what it was now, since the coffee fell, then you will say tea is relatively costlier, or coffee is relatively cheaper. Though it is still not cheaper than tea, tea is cheaper, but compared to before you will say that coffee is relatively cheaper. When coffee is relatively cheaper, people who are drinking tea, the existing consumers who drink tea, switch over to coffee. So what has happened? The demand for tea will fall and demand for coffee will increase. What I taught in this substitute goods, please pay attention. You have to take into consideration that tea is your good that you're drinking and coffee is your substitute. If you start saying that if the price of tea increases, then what will happen is demand for coffee will increase. Then what you're talking about is your commodity price is increasing. If you say the price of your commodity is increasing, it is a topic which is actually price of the commodity. Here, the price of the commodity tea will not change, but the price of the related good, the substitute good, will change. That is why I always kept the price of tea as 10 rupees. There is no change in the price of the commodity, but there is a change in the price of the substitute good. So finally, when the price of the substitute good decreases, what happens is coffee becomes relatively cheaper. Now when you say relative cheaper, what does it mean? It means that compared to before 40 rupees, now it is 20 rupees. So it is relatively cheaper to tea. Doesn't mean that it's cheaper than tea. So when the price of tea remains the same, and the price of coffee substitute good falls, then what will happen? People who are drinking tea, 10 rupees, may think that it's only 20 rupees, let's switch over. So what happens? Demand for coffee increases and demand for tea will decrease. The next thing is complementary goods. Complementary goods demanded jointly. It's something like joint demand. A typical example I told you was petrol and petrol cars. Like mobile phone and SIM, butter, bread, okay. What happens here is complementary goods are goods that are consumed jointly to satisfy a given want. The demand for a commodity increases when the price of its complement decreases. An example is given to you regarding the price of petrol. So let me explain to you. We will take a typical case of petrol and petrol cars. Okay, let's see. Let us say here petrol cars, the price of petrol is say 80 rupees per liter. When the price of petrol was 80 rupees per liter, let us say there was a demand was around about say 50 cars per week. Okay. If the price of petrol falls, now it is say 40 rupees per liter. That will be too less, let's make it 50 at least. What happens? When the price of petrol fell, the demand for petrol cars will increase. 80 cars per week. So, when the price of petrol falls, the demand for petrol cars increases. Similarly, when the price of petrol increases, demand for petrol cars decreases. What can you say here? There is an inverse relationship. If I were to draw a graph showing an inverse relationship means negative sloping. Negative sloping again means, say this is 50, this is 80 rupees. When the price is 80 rupees, 80 rupees per liter, 50 cars. 50 rupees per liter, 80 cars. You will see this is downward sloping towards the right. Negative sloping, there is demand. You should also notice when you draw diagrams, price, income should always be on the y-axis, supply, demand on the x-axis. Always keep your price and income on the y-axis. Well, that is all for today. I will continue with my other factors affecting demand. This is this much for today. Have a good day. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I am here today again to teach you subject called commercial application. Yesterday I did teach you about market and marketing. I could not cover much yesterday, and today again we'll be going ahead with the same chapter. Yesterday's portion was market and marketing as shown on the slide here, and today I'll be talking about types of market, stages of marketing, meaning of product and service with some examples. then differences between a product and a service, and this is what you got to study even for your ICSE exams. So now, without delaying, we go into the chapter. So we have types of market. So when you talk about types of market, it is traditional market and non-traditional market. Traditional markets are those markets where the marketers use common methods of communicating with the buyers. Those conventional ways of creating a link with the consumer, like through advertisement on the radio, advertisement on the television, it may be pamphlets, it may be hoarding, so on. But when it comes to non-traditional market, it is a different way of having communication with the consumers, employing new methods of establishing contacts with the consumer. It may be through a new means of communications like email, Facebook, Twitter, salesmanship, door-to-door, so on. Then we'll go on to the different kinds of traditional markets divided on the basis of geographical area. When we talk about geographical area, it is the boundary, whether the market caters to the needs of local people or certain region or a state or a national or a nation or international buyers and sellers. So your traditional markets on the basis of geographical area can be divided into 4 subdivisions. The first one being the local market. Now when we talk about local market, we are mostly talking about your own town or village or a city where the manufacturer from the local place will produce the goods and sell in that same local place. Like manufacturer producing in one particular town will sell his product in that particular town. That is called a local market. The next kind of market on the basis of geographical location is the regional market. When you talk about the regional market, here the area or the boundary will be bigger than the local area. Here you may be catering to the needs of a certain region, maybe a southern region, or maybe 2 states or 3 states. Like you produce a product here in Kalimpong and would like to sell in Sikkim or northern state, then that becomes your regional market. Another market here you have is a national market. As the word goes, national, a nation. You are catering to the needs of the entire country here. You have the buyers and sellers from the entire country. Your activities of promoting your business is not restricted to a limited area. Rather, you are spreading your business to the entire nation. So that's a national market. And another type of market you have is the international market, where you have the buyers and sellers from different countries. You're catering to the needs of not only your country, but also to the needs of the other countries. So that's all about geography. That's all about traditional market categorized on the basis of geographical area. Now we go on to the traditional market divided on the basis of volume of business. Now what is volume of business? Amounts of goods transacted, amount of goods bought and purchased. On this basis, your market can be a wholesale market. So in wholesale market, what happens? There will be buying and selling of goods in large quantities. Here, in the wholesale market, goods will be sold to the retailer. But it doesn't mean that I cannot buy from the wholesale market. If I, as an individual, would like to buy from the wholesale market, then I do need to buy in large quantities. Then you have another kind called retail market, where there is a link between the retailer and the consumer. The final consumer buy the product from the retail market. What is the advantage in the retail market? That the goods are available in the quantities required by you. You can buy in large quantities as well as you can buy in small quantities. You can ask for 100 grams or you can ask for 1 kg of sugar. That's a retail market, and here you have a direct relationship with the consumer, with the final consumer. Then you have again traditional market categorized on the basis of subject of exchange. Now what is subject of exchange? That means what is being sold in that particular market. So you have commodity market. Now what is called commodity? It may be a cotton, it may be jute, it may be rice, where these products will be sold in the market under some certain rules and regulations. Then you have another kind, capital market. When you talk about the capital market, it is a market which is related to providing long-term finance to the business houses. Long-term capital, that means capital for longer period of time will be available from this market. And this market consists of stock exchanges, insurance companies, merchant bank. These are the institutions which provide long-term capital to the business house. Then you have another kind of market on the basis of subject of exchange, that is money market. Money market provides short-term capital to the business house or to the individual. Mind it here. Here the capital market will provide long-term capital to the business house, whereas the money market will provide short-term capital to the business house or to the individual. And money market includes all the banks. All the banks. It may be a cooperative bank or any other commercial banks will come under the money market. Then you have another kind of market which is divided on the basis of position of buyers and sellers. When you talk about the position of buyers and sellers, what kind of buyers are there and what kind of sellers are there? So you have the first kind you have is the primary market. This primary market is related to the agricultural produce. Agricultural produce, where these agricultural products like ginger, orange, apples are sold directly to the wholesaler or to the agent or to the distributor. Next you have secondary market. In the secondary market, there is a relationship between the wholesaler and the retailer. Wholesaler sells goods to the retailer, right? Then you have another kind of market known as terminal market. In the terminal market, the ultimate consumers like you and me go to that market and buy the product as per our likes and wants. Here, the retailer is directly in touch with the final consumer. Got it? Then the next one you have is on the basis of nature of transaction. Again, your traditional market can be your spot market or it can be a future market. Now, when you talk about the spot market here, the delivery of goods and products will be done on the spot. Exchange of goods will take place on the spot. Right? Then you have future market. Now, when we talk about the future market, here the delivery of goods does not take place. The buyers and seller come to an agreement to have a deal in the future. And this future market is mostly undertaken in order to in order not to deliver the product. Rather, they will have the settlement for the profit or loss. But the question comes, how do they earn profit or loss when there is no physical delivery of goods? This is mostly happens in the stock markets or commodity markets. Here, the profit or loss will be determined according to the fluctuation in the price of that product. And that profit or loss will be settled in this future market. Then, again, your traditional market on the basis of nature of goods. Now, when you talk about the nature of goods, see, goods can be your consumer goods or goods can be your producer goods. Consumer goods are those goods which are purchased by the consumer for their own consumption. So when a consumer goes to the market and buys a particular product for his own consumption, that is called consumer market. And if a product is produced by another set of people for the purpose of using it as raw materials for further production of a finished product, then that particular market will be termed as producer market. Let's take an example here. I'll just give an example of milk. We drink to make ourselves strong. Milk. A household buying milk for the final consumption will be termed as consumer goods, and the market from where the household is buying that milk will be termed as consumer market. But the same product, milk, can also be purchased by the producer, maker, or marketer in order to buy another final product. Say, your final product can be tea or curd. So here the milk is used as raw material to produce further goods called tea or curd. So the market from where this milk will be bought for the purpose of producing another product will be termed as producer market. So that's all about different categories of market based on tradition, or different categories of traditional market. Now I go on to the non-traditional markets. Non-traditional market means market which uses the uncommon method of establishing contacts with the consumer. And we have different kinds of non-traditional markets, like different types of non-traditional markets like catalog market. You know the meaning of catalog? It can be a booklet or it can be a piece of paper as shown here in the figure. In this catalog, what do you find? You find all those products. Descriptions of the products are given to you. These catalogs can be found in a showroom where the sellers will give you the catalogs. You will go through the catalogs, the descriptions will be there. You will go through the descriptions, then you make a decision to buy that particular product. So market done on the basis of this catalog is known as catalog market. Then you have another kind called in-house market. You can see here a person driving scooty here. You can say a pizza delivery boy. You can say another person pressing the bell here, calling out the person there. That is called salesman. All these are doing the work of salesman. This market is called door-to-door selling market. Here the salesman will visit from one house to another house, explaining about the product, generating needs for them, convincing the consumer and persuading the consumer to buy the product. His ultimate goal is to dispose of the product to the consumer after making them satisfied with his explanation. Then we have the other kind of market, non-traditional market, where the buyers and sellers establishes a relationship in a different way. Here, the communication takes place through the post office. This communication may take place through the email. A letter will be sent to the prospective buyer. Email will be sent to the potential buyer, explaining about the product, providing entire information with regard to that product, even the price, delivery, payment. And if the potential buyer likes the product, he might place the order over the telephone, and the products will be sent or delivered to him through courier. Then you have another non-traditional market called automatic vending machine. These are mostly used by Mother Dairy now in order to sell their product. What do you see here? Products of daily use are sold this way. A machine is being installed where coins can be inserted in the place there, and products comes out through some opening here. These kind of machines are installed near the colleges, schools, busy places in order to sell the product. So see here the ways of establishing contact with the buyer. Contact is being established indirectly through a machine. Then you have telemarket. In a telemarket, what happens? You take the help of television, your telephone. Products are advertised on the television. Display of the products are shown on the television. Descriptions are given on the television. And on the basis of that, a consumer or a buyer takes a decision to buy the product. If he is satisfied with the explanation or with the display, he can place the order through the telephone, because the toll-free number will be given there, and the products are delivered to their house through the courier, and payment can be done in any form they want, maybe cash on delivery or debit card or credit card, so on. And lastly, we have network market. What is network market? This network market has been pioneered by Amway. It's a company selling different kinds of products, pioneered by him. In the network market, what happens? You have the individual people who are employed by the company as a distributor. He is an independent person here. He employs under him two persons, one on the left, another on the right. They are termed as team. This person will again further employ another team under him, left and right wing. This way it will go on multiplying. Yet this person, if he wants, he can sell the product, or if he wants, he can keep on developing different teams under him. This network marketing is also known as multi-level marketing, or also known as pyramid marketing. Yeah, so now let's go on to the second topic here, another topic here, stages of marketing. In my previous video, I have talked about marketing. What a marketing is? It is a process of making the goods and making it available to the consumer at the right time, at the right place, and at the right price. In other words, you can say marketing means promoting your product in order to sell it to the ultimate buyer. When we talk about stages of marketing, It is a kind of belief that the marketers have, which underwent change over the years, over the period of time. Now let's see what were the different beliefs they had. Number one is production-oriented stage. This is the oldest stage of marketing. Here the marketers or the manufacturer believed that whatever product is produced by them will be purchased by the buyer. So they focused on large-scale production and reducing the price. Because their belief was that if the products are readily available and sold at a lower price, the products will be sold. It was the belief then because there were very few producers and limited products were available. Demand exceeded the supply, so the buyers had no choice than to buy whatever were available to them. But again, this belief, as the time passed by, behavior changed. The buyers were showing resistance to the product. They were not buying whatever products being available or being brought into the market. They were checking the quality of the product, and they were buying only those products which were of superior quality. So the marketers believed and focused on enhancing the quality of the product, having or bringing innovative features into the product so that their products were of superior quality. So this was the stage of having a superior quality product, right? But again, by increasing the quality of the product, they still had a problem. Why? As the time passed by, many firms joined the production process. Varieties of products were produced into the market, were produced in the market. There were lots of different kinds of product available to the consumer. They had lots of choice. So the problem was how to sell. So you had a next stage called sales-oriented stage. Here the biggest problem was how to sell the product. So they thought sales cannot be done unless you employ aggressive selling techniques, unless you employ promotional techniques like buy one, get one free, discount. These are all promotional techniques of attracting consumers. Employing salesperson, using them to convince and persuade the customers. This was the time of sales-oriented stage. This was the time of aggressive selling through advertisement, promotional measures. Here, the manufacturers or the marketers started giving importance to the consumer. They felt that, yes, they now need the consumer. Then we step into the present day's marketing system called marketing-oriented stage. Here, in this stage, we consider consumer as the king. Why? Because the manufacturer are giving due importance to the consumer's needs, likes, preferences. Products are produced as per the likes and wants of the consumer. So here the market, they carry out market research before the product is produced and brought into the market. A market research means collecting information from the consumer about what kind of products they are looking forward. What are the features they want to have in the product? So the objective of this marketing-oriented stage is providing consumer satisfaction. Providing consumer satisfaction by manufacturing the products as per the likes and wants of the consumer. So the main goal was to earn profit through consumer satisfaction. Then now, this is a newly developed marketing stage, which is called societal marketing stage. Here, more importance is given to the consumer needs and the wants by taking into account the welfare of the society. In the societal marketing stage, society's benefits are also taken into account in order to produce the product. No marketers will undertake those production processes which will degrade the environment or which will harm the ethics and customs of the society. They make the product in order to satisfy the needs of the consumer. At the same time, they also see the welfare or well-being of the society. So that's what a societal marketing stage. Next, you have social media marketing. Now, what is social media marketing? As the name goes by, social media. What are the social medias you have? Yes? Yeah. Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp. Now, these are the platforms that are being used in order to promote the product. Yes, and very important is relationship marketing. In the relationship marketing, the marketers not only try to sell the product. Now here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, what are they doing all these years here? They were trying to sell the products, one or the other products. But here in the relationship marketing, their main objective is to build long-term relationship. In the relationship marketing, their objective is to get hold of those existing customers. And hence, they have started considering the consumer as a worthful people. So they started sending birthday wishes, birthday gifts, birthday cards, so that the customers feel important, like their brand, more of their brand, and keep on spending more on the brand of that particular company. So, dear students, this much for today, and the remaining portion will be continued in my next class. And thank you so much, and have a blessed day ahead.